The hype train's in full overdrive now, boys. Jump on or get left in the dust. Been about 1 year since we covered a topic like this one. Just didn't end up having time during the Warden and the Paunch, so the Shadow and the Blade was the last DLC. We had a nice long look at the Mortal Empires map. And with the Twisted and the Twilight releasing on December 3rd, figured it's a good time to cover start positions and some of the massive changes coming to Mortal Empires. Happy tree friends and mutant monster rats are about to swarm the surface world, so let's dive right in with Throt the Unclean and the Master Mutators of Clan Moulder. Things are about to get even dicier for Malekith and the Dark Elves, who already have an obnoxious amount of Skaven and Northmen to deal with at their borders, because Throt has made his way all the way over from the old world into the Vortex campaign, starting just east of Naggarond, north of the Sea of Malice. This is actually a pretty powerful economic base, because Naggaroth has a lot of major cities with great economic potential, all within spitting distance of one another. So sure, Throt may not be able to make use of the gold mine in Grond or build up a 10,000 gold a turn stronghold in Naggarond, but he will be able to blitz the Dark Elves before they have a chance to establish a power base, especially considering he can poop out brood horrors, rat ogres, and Helpit abominations using his growth vat. With a bunch of major Dark Elf cities under his command early, and the fact that Skaven can instantly colonize them at a high level, I expect his start here to severely hamper the Druchii, at least when you're playing as him. But it would not surprise me in the slightest if AI Malekith has a ton of issues with AI Throt as well. He has not been having a great time in my campaigns over the last year or so, and I expect his life isn't getting any easier with these new additions. But Throt the Unclean's growth potential in Mortal Empires is a very different story. Helpit is a super cool start position, but I don't think it's going to be an easy one by any stretch of the imagination. First off, early game Skaven do not match up well versus dwarfs, and your initial enemy will almost always be Krakadrak. They own all the underground settlements near the giant home mountains, so it only makes sense to expand into their territory, and they're probably the faction you start at war with. The issue with that is that early game Skaven units kind of suck against heavily armored Dawi infantry. It's only when you start unlocking Jezzails and Doomflayers and Doom Wheels and the powerful ranged options like the Mortars that the Ratmen gain a huge advantage in this matchup. And that takes time. A lot of time. It can be upwards of 50 turns before you start churning those bad boys out. So, if you're in a situation where you're on turn 5 and you're pushing to the Norse Dwarf capital, you're not going to have a lot of those options that make it easy to fight Dawi. And frankly, Clan Moulder itself does not match up incredibly well versus dwarfs. Brood Horrors will certainly be annoying for Dawi to deal with. They're fast, they do have AP, and you might be able to get them pretty early on with the growth vat, but most of their monsters just aren't kitted out for killing heavily armored infantry in a grindfest. That's not where the Thagaraki really shine. And once you've dealt with Krakadrak, you've got a block of Kislev and the Empire to contend with directly to the south and west. Likely a united Norska by turn 30 or 40, whose Berserkers and Surtha X Mammoth will shred your infantry, and you're on the very doorstep of the Chaos Invasion, which now has a difficulty slider, so you can make your life easier or harder depending on how you want to play it. It can be turned off completely or jacked up to legendary levels, but generally speaking, Chaos Invasion right at Helpit when they spawn in means you might have some issues there. Things won't get any easier for you when Warhammer 3 drops and Kislev becomes a real faction with Polar Bear Cavalry and hordes of angry horsemen with gunpowder support, and demons are going to be entering the fray as well. So, while an alliance with them is no guarantee, you might have some diplomatic bonuses with Chaos and demons and all that, just because they tend to be at war with these same factions you are. So, I guess you can kind of determine how hard your campaign is, whether you want to fight Chaos or not, but if they decide to dow you early when the Chaos Invasion starts, might get freaky fast. In Helpit, you're probably going to be starting with some kind of landmark building that buffs monsters, just because it's a logical feature to add for them when you're talking about the birthplace of Skavendom's abominations. But yeah, I can see it being a pretty challenging start position in Mortal Empires, especially on the higher difficulties. Now, before we get into the campaign exclusive features for Clan Moulder and Throt Daddy, I do want to call attention to some changes on the map. As you can see, there's a huge question mark over the right side of the screen. Generally speaking, Creative Assembly likes to add these kind of new regions many patches ahead of when they're actually utilized by player-controlled factions, but the additions themselves almost always tell us something important, and I think that's the case here as well. For example, Massif or Cal was added to the Prophet and the Warlock patch back in April of 2019, but it did not become an official start position until the Warden and the Paunch launched a year later. It is now, of course, the home base of Grom and the Broken Axe tribe. The map expansion into the Darklands in the southeast corner of Mortal Empires was hinted at many months before the Shadow and the Blade officially dropped, but sure enough, it became the focal point of a three-way war between Imric of Calidor, Malice Darkblade, and Deathmaster Snikich many moons later. I think you see where I'm going with this. There's a new region to the east that expands to the borders of the Darklands and further fleshes out the World's Edge Mountains. I don't know that we've ever gotten an official concrete location for Silver Pinnacle in the lore, but it certainly is going to be somewhere in this question mark area, in the northeast range of the World's Edge Mountains. Creative Assembly aren't adding that for funsies. They're hinting at something here and won't follow up with what that is for probably at least another year or so. But the hint is fairly obvious all the same. There's a minor faction that got added in this patch, one that did not replace the Silver Host in Lamia, I don't believe, and it's called the Lamian Sisterhood. Even has an icon that shares an uncanny resemblance to a certain vampiric waifu. Yeah, Neferata's coming, dudes, and so am I. Simultaneous release like the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I adore this character. Neferata is awesome in every single facet, and whether it's in some kind of pre-order scenario, a starting faction in Game 3, or a free content drop, I hope CA does justice to her, both in terms of her visuals and her gameplay mechanics, because that spot is almost certainly going to be where she starts her playthrough when she finally gets added to Mortal Empires. But do not expect Neferata next patch. I really do think Beastmen are the only logical step at this point as a next step, as a next DLC. And I don't believe we'll have to wait for Warhammer 3 to get their rework and new units. Wood Elves are dropping right now. Beastmen next is 100% the way to go. So yeah, besides Silver Pinnacle and Neferata, we are getting the Forest of Gloom near Blackfire Pass and the Border Princes, Griffin Wood on the border between Talabek Land and Ostermark, which will very likely be the home base for Drycha and the Wargrove of Woe. We're getting a new magical forest in Lustria that the Wood Elves can teleport to via the Deep Roots, and Nystra and Arahan start position in Nagaroth, the Witchwood. I believe there's also a new region in the Southlands and likely a few others that I missed, but this is without a doubt one of the hypest additions we've had to Mortal Empires since launch. There are some really nice changes here that really kind of open up the map and add a bunch of flavor. And I really do love this map stuff, man. Like, it's just super fun to talk about and speculate on. So hopefully with every single patch, CA continues to expand and add to Mortal Empires. It's really fun to work with. Alright, so Throt the Unclean's campaign mechanics and features. Talk about that, and then we'll move on to the Sisters of Twilight. Clan Moulder will of course have their infamous Flesh Lab, which allows you to fix special traits and buffs to units, like adding Frenzy and Regeneration to Skaven Slaves or Storm Vermin, and they receive a 50% reduction to construction costs for Breeding Stock, Packmaster, Feeding Chamber, and Lab buildings as well. All Clan Moulder characters will start with a 10% increase to HP, which can be further improved via skill trees, and they're immune to mountain attrition, because they're Skaven. Don't want to be losing them in mountain passes and underway battles when you know you're going to be spending the majority of your time moving through those territories. And of course, you'll be colonizing a lot of Norska, because your suitable climates are mountainous and frozen regions. For Lord effects, the Twisted and Ingenious Master Mutator of Clan Moulder has a 20% upkeep reduction, plus 10 armor, weapon damage, melee defense, and missile resist buff for all Helpit units, which is perfectly in keeping with the theme here. A focus on improving the durability and staying power of your monsters. Will hopefully make Rat Ogres a lot more viable in campaign. Kind of a good MP unit, but not seen as much play on the campaign side of things. Even if they'll never be a true Doomstack type of unit, they should be quite good with all these buffs. Remains to be seen though. I think that you might be able to stack bonuses from Packmasters and Throt alongside heals, regen, and the Flesh Lab. And if you put all those things together, it would not surprise me at all if they become stupidly good. Or at least they have the potential to become stupidly good. You might need to put some work in to get them to that point. But certainly going to be fun to experiment with. And of course, Throt has regeneration himself. Now in the source material, Brood Horrors already have regen. So I'm wondering if Throt will be in a kind of Luther Harkin type scenario where he gets double regen when he's mounted on a Brood Horror, which frankly I think would be quite fitting for a magnificent thick boy like Throt the Unclean. His body's meant to withstand ridiculous punishment and keep on trucking, so mortally wounding him should prove quite difficult except for when he's fighting against flaming damage, which will be his natural counter. So I think double regen suits him pretty well. On the other side of this DLC, we of course have the beautiful sisters Nystra and Arahan, the Sisters of Twilight, split by the weave to become the yin-yang twins. 10 points to Gryffindor for anyone who gets that joke. But I will say, the official artwork from Games Workshop completely threw me for a loop in regards to who was who. This entire time, since I learned about the characters years ago, I have always thought of Arahan as the white-haired, violent sister. I mean, look at that picture there. She's described as a bloodthirsty, combative creature who loves the rush of battle, which in the portrait here, it looks like the white-haired twin is enjoying the fight and the thrill of the kill, while the more reserved, patient, and protective sister is entering combat with grim resolve, determination, and taking no pleasure in it whatsoever. So it's weird that they painted it this way, and it almost seems like whoever did the artwork might not have actually known which sister was which, or GW didn't make it clear to them which one was which, because Arahan, the violent sister, is actually the black-haired one in this painting, and Nystra, the kind sister, is the white-haired one, which is super confusing considering she's rocking an insane battle-hungry grin here as a pure and reserved individual. I just think the whole art direction there is very strange and utterly confusing, but maybe you guys didn't have that problem. Anyway, they will be starting their campaign in the Witchwood of Naggaroth, just north of Iron Peaks and the Doom Glades. In general, right now, I'd say the Wood Elf campaign playstyle, from what I've played of the rework so far, is characterized by power spikes. There's a lot of ebb and flow to it. Starts out pretty slow, you fight some force encounters early and maybe raise a few settlements around you to just get some money and purify the heathlands and start improving the health of your forest, which is the effective way to do so. But for the most part, the start of the campaign is pretty defensive. That changes once you get the Oak of Ages to level 2, because at that point, you unlock a bunch of Confederation missions and can quickly snowball out of control on hard and very hard. I have not tried Legendary yet. I am aware that Legend and others have kind of expressed a distaste for the economic limitations on the highest difficulties, because there's most certainly an upper bound to how much money you can make from your economy because of the changes to the buildings outside your main settlements. And this may very well be a problem, or it may not be. I've not played Legendary, so I can't speak to that at all, but at least in my experience, you can gobble up high-level settlements through Confederation all over the world using the Deep Roots, which leads to a serious mid-game power spike where you are extremely strong and become powerful very quickly out of nowhere, because you're essentially confederating tier 5 settlements that each make a ton of money. So from there, you get armies on every continent, raise a bunch of stuff for cash, and have an insane mid-game. Once you have all the magical forests, though, your campaign slows back down again, because you can't sustain as many late-game armies as some other factions. And the fact that they're still hit by that supply lines penalty means that hurts a lot, because you don't have a very high upper bound. You have a limit to how many settlements you can own. There's only a handful of magical forests. From that point on, your economy becomes sacking and raising based, and that will likely be the same for the Sisters of Twilight. Super defensive early game until you unlock the ritual and Ariel the Mage Queen. Then you confederate a bunch of factions real quick, snowball out of control, take the guy in Vale once the Lariel questline pops, and you go to Ulthuan, and then late game, shift back into defensive mode and survive until the Oak of Ages is maxed out. In terms of faction and lord effects, the Heralds of Ariel are doted upon by Daith, the Master Smith of Torgavan, who will grant unique items, weapons, and armor every few turns, which should hopefully lead to some large and impactful bonuses. They grant every Hawk Rider in their army the Volley of Kurnus, which is exactly what it sounds like, a volley of mini arrows of Kurnus, more akin to magic missiles than regular arrows, so that should hopefully do a lot of damage for them. And every ranged unit in their army gets plus 10% ammunition, which is quite a large increase to the potential cap for DPS. And they have a clear focus on, well, I guess not DPS, technically overall damage, because DPS would be per second, but you know what I mean. They definitely have a clear focus on flying troops as Masters of the Eyrie. Their homeland, the Pine Crags, is known to be a menagerie of woodland beasts, where Seth and Har and Gwendolyn, their mounts, make their nests. And looks like we'll be getting upkeep, charge, melee attack, physical resistance, and vanguard buffs for hawks, eagles, and forest dragons, which should be quite impactful, especially considering Hawk Riders have 360-degree fire arc now. I feel like the aerial presence in the Wood Elf roster has been largely neglected up to this point, so to see them get some love in is real nice. Nystra will of course have her Talon of Dawn, used for hunting large monsters, and Arahan will have the Talon of Dusk, firing multi-shot arrows for exploding hordes of lightly armored infantry. So you'll have multiple ways to engage opponents, and should be theoretically good versus every target on the field. They've got better movement range, better sightlines, better casualty replenishment, which is especially huge for the Wood Elves. They've got growth, public order, and a ward save bonus as well. So overall, sounding like quite a well-rounded legendary lord. It'll become even more powerful once they unleash Ariel the Mage Queen after their first ritual and healing of the Deepwood. Very exciting stuff. So, let me know, from everything you've heard in this video after seeing the skills and start positions of both lords, who are you more hyped for here? What's your favorite part of the update? And what are you looking forward to most when the Twisted and the Twilight drops on December 3rd? Hope you guys enjoyed this overview. Lots of cool stuff coming very soon, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Any Pride, signing out for now. Have a good one, guys.